So, welcome to another episode of On the Panel. So, what does every photographer aim for? To create a unique image. But every photographer has his own unique style of doing it. In my case, if you take, for example, I run after species. I love going to new locations. I love trying out and exploring innovative forms of photography using technology. And with that, I love blending creativity. But today, I'm going to talk to a very inspirational photographer who has been working in Kenya for the past 2 decades. And he works in locations where hundreds of photographers go to those locations. And despite of that fact, he has his own unique trademark style of shooting images, which is par excellence. So I'll be introducing you guys to Federico Veronesi, who is one of Kenya's top wildlife photographers. I'm a great admirer of his work, and many of you who would have read my book Chasing Horizons, you will have seen that my foreword has been written by Federico. That's because I really respect his work, and I'm a great fan of his work. So we'll be talking about the evolution of photography in Kenya over the past few years, and a lot about how Federico approaches his photography, and of course how the because of the Corona crisis, the situation in Kenyan wildlife tourism, how it's going to affect Kenyan wildlife tourism in the coming few months. So over to Federico. So hi Federico.
Hello, Shivang.
Welcome to my episode of On the Panel. First of all, on behalf of all my countrymen, I'm deeply sorry for the entire situation in Italy because of the Corona crisis, and I hope Italy is able to revive from this entire mess, and people can lead a normal life in the coming months. So,
Thank you. Thank you.
so how are things going in Nairobi as of now?
Yeah, it was things are strange. I would say strange. Everybody is being asked to stay home as much as possible. People cannot leave Nairobi. We are not allowed to leave Nairobi County to prevent the spread. The cases are still quite low at the moment. The official ones are still quite low. So hopefully these strict measures that the government is undertaking will prevent a major spread, because the health system here will be under severe stress if that should happen. So I'm just staying home. I've been home for a month since returning from Tanzania, and just home. So it's a bit strange. It's a bit strange, but we have to endure and be resilient, and hopefully come out alive, because this disease is really a terrible disease. It started as like, yeah, it's just a flu, but it turns out it's something much worse. So there's no joke. There's no joking about it. So we have to
That's true.
try. Yeah.
So, Federico, let me start with a very basic question. Somebody recently asked me in one of my photo safaris that what is creativity? So, my answer was that creativity is essentially the art of seeing. So, that person then came back with a question that do you develop the art of seeing? I mean, is it something which is inbuilt in you, or does it come with practice? So I actually started thinking about that. That was that something which was inbuilt in me, or did it come with practice? So, what is your opinion about that?
I think there's a good portion of it, I think, is inbuilt, but a lot also comes from practice. I think it's a combination of the two things. Obviously, you could also, the creativity comes also from looking at what other photographers have done in other fields of photography, maybe, and from there you mix it with your own with your own feelings, your own emotion, and and hopefully come up with something new and see things, and you see things hopefully in a new way. That being said, it's not easy at all. It's not easy at all to come up with new images and new imagery, but it's I think it's a mix of the two. Basically, it's a mix of the two elements. But there is a strong element of natural instinct. It's
Right.
very instinct,
I
and
agree.
sometimes you have an instinct for an image, and then you take it, and then you feel it so much, and then other people look at it and it's like, oh, this is not very good. So sometimes your instinct can lead you into dead ends in
Yeah.
a way, but that's part of who you are. So I think it's
Right.
important to let it come out, and let have come face to face with your own sensitivity and the limitations of your sensitivity, so that you can fine tune it, and the more you do it, you get better and better at seeing things, and
Right.
so it's a very difficult process, but a lot of it is instinct, I think.
Right. So, Federico, we all know that Kenya has been your main domain area for years. In fact, ever since I met you all those years back, and even before that, you have been working in Kenya. And apart from that, Kenya has always been the hotspot for wildlife photography. So, how do you see that the photographic trend in Kenya has changed ever since you started shooting in that part of the world?
Well, I came to Kenya. I moved to Kenya in 2002 permanently. But I first came to Kenya for 2-3 months in 2000. So this was still at the time when digital photography hadn't picked up at all. So photography was still wildlife photography was still entirely based on slides and on film photography. And at that time, I would probably at that time I think probably the major emphasis was still on documenting dramatic or extraordinary situations when I came in. And also when I started, I was also kind of catching up on that somehow myself. So it was trying to see beautiful interactions, unusual interactions, and obviously trying to document it in the best possible way, as obviously taking as much as possible in beautiful light. And so, but I think at that time probably the emphasis was still mostly on the documentation. Then when digital photography came in, and more people started photographing, I think now the emphasis is kind of shifting towards more artistic imagery, trying to not necessarily only document sightings, which is still there, and it's still huge, especially now with the new technologies. Some photographs that were not maybe so easy to take 20 years ago are now maybe more can be taken, especially in low light conditions. So that is still going on, but there's been a strong shift on artistic imagery, and a lot of black and white as is now coming into the scene. And recently I see a lot of images taken with low angle remote cameras, and that's I remember in 2006, 2005, Anuk Shah was already starting with that, but now it has become much more widespread. So it's like I feel it's all part of a process to try to come up with something new out of a destination and animals that have been extensively photographed. So obviously people have to try to find new ways to do that. So I think that's the shift that I've seen from mostly documental, good, extraordinary documental imagery now to more artistic, more creativity, more emphasis on black and white, different angles. This is what I have been seeing, which is great, because Kenya has so much to offer and so many possibilities to do this. You know, it gives you a lot of, with its wide open places, the beautiful skies of Kenya. So there's a lot of elements that can come together to make different imagery. Also now there's much more of a I see it in my own photography, so I'm also talking about my own photography, the inclusion of space around the animals, of the habitats. It's very big in Kenya now, and that is helped, I think, by the beauty of the landscape of Kenya. Many of the parks in Kenya, or of course also in Tanzania as well, the Serengeti as well, the landscape itself is so beautiful and stunning that the animal then becomes just a part of the landscape. So that's why also all these things are possible in these countries.
A lot of people, Federico, they come to me and they ask this question that, why do you keep going back to Kenya? Because the place is so crowded with photographers, and when it comes to working in Kenya, the volume of photographers is always growing every year. So my answer is quite simple. I like working in that place because of my love for light. I love the light out there. I love the creative compositions which can be done out there. I just love the creativity which can be generated from Kenyan parks. So, for you as a photographer, what keeps you going so that you can break the monotony of wildlife imagery in Kenya? Because you spend a lot of time in Kenyan parks, and as a photographer, you're always surrounded with hundreds of photographers. So, do you at times feel that I should just take a break from Kenya and visit some other parts of the world and try out something new? Enough of this shit, something like that?
Well, let's say I know I don't. On one side, we tend to associate Kenya a lot with the Masai Mara.
Yeah.
There's so many other places in Kenya. So I've done a lot of work in the Mara, and ever since 2007, when I moved there for 4 or 5 years. I was there like 7 months a year. Then with all the safaris, I'm still spending a lot of time there. But I'm feeling a little bit, especially due to the enormous pressure on the wildlife given by the number of photographers and tourists in general. So I feel a bit. I have this feeling a little bit of exhaustion from the Mara, a little bit, because I see it. Everything it's much more difficult these days over there because of the pressure, and you see the pressure on the animals. You see some of the disturbance. So I have that feeling of getting away, but not from Kenya, mostly from the Mara itself. But Kenya has a lot of other interesting places to offer. So one is, for example, is Amboseli, and the Samburu, Laikipia, Tsavo. So there's a lot of other places in Kenya. So I don't feel that desire to necessarily to go away from Kenya at all. But that being said, I really love spending time in Tanzania as well, in the Serengeti ecosystem. When I started, as I said before, and when I started, I was been reading all the books and watching the documentaries about the big cats in the Mara. So I was new there. So I wanted to see everything. I wanted to see the leopards with cubs. I wanted to see cheetahs hunting. So I really had that desire to feel to feel that anxiousness of seeing everything. So in the first couple of years, that was my main focus. So spending a lot of time with the animals, waiting for behaviors, and but in reality, I wasn't. I realized that for the most part, I wasn't doing anything new in terms of photography. I wasn't really. But then when I moved full time in the Mara, I started doing black and white a lot. Although that now I'm photographing almost, I wouldn't say entirely, but almost entirely. But I started already in 2007, 2008 to do black and white, and I started trying to focus a lot on backlight, always backlight. I remember many times in the Mara back then, I was often in conflict with other photographers. Everybody wanted to be on one side of the light, so I was always trying to be on the opposite side. So I had to make sure that I would take my position way before anyone else already for the backlight. Otherwise, I wouldn't have been able to move. Of course, you cannot move opposite everyone else. So I had to be there way early already, predicting for the backlight, because that was not, a lot of people were coming to me and saying, why you want us all on this? Why are we all on this side? The light is shit here. And why are we here? Why don't we go to the other side? So that was happening a lot. But I would say, look, I like it here. I want to photograph on this side. It still happens. So that was a part. So that the Light and Dust book then kind of evolved out of that emphasis for backlight, and especially when you have that other elements of dust and mist or coming together for silhouette. That's something that really always fascinated me a lot. And then the motion blur as well. That's something that tried. I cannot say there are some photographers who almost entirely photograph in motion, in panning, and so I'm not at those extremes, but I like that effect. I remember in particular there was a migration scene, probably the most beautiful migration scene migration crossing I've ever seen. It's in the book. It's in the Light and Dust book. It's a black and white widespread. The crossing was so wide, it was unbelievable. So initially I was planning to do, because I had done a lot of crossings already, so I was starting I had all my cameras set for slow motion to capture some panning stuff. And then when I saw that beauty, that the majesty of that crossing, I said, oh, look at this is unbelievable. To hell with the slow motion, and let's go to the normal, because it was so unbelievable that so I'm not so obsessed with that, but I like panning it. I've not done much with the remote cameras. I'm not so fond of it. It's not really I see a lot of people going into it, but I'm not.
Yeah.
I like to be, I like to have my eyes in the viewfinder. I just still can't cope with that separation between me and the camera.
Since we are talking about Masai Mara, there are two questions from the audience, which I would just like to put up here. So with the growing number of vehicles out there in the Mara right now, especially during the migration time, do you see that as a problem? I mean, of course we do, but how do you see that as a problem now and for the future?
I think that it has come to an extreme where it is now a problem. It is a problem first for the animals. Although many of the animals are well habituated to the cars, but there is still an enormous pressure and an enormous harassment. Although you might not see it, but you might think, oh no, this leopard is walking through the car, so she's fine. But it's really not. It's really too much. When you have 50 or 60 cars around an animal, that's not, even if each individual car is not doing anything wrong per se, just the sheer number is maybe blocking the sight, and maybe there's a cheetah with cubs and there's an hyena, and the cheetah needs to see that hyena. If you have 50 cars around her, she cannot see the hyena, she cannot see the lion approaching. Or if there's a hunt in progress, the cheetah tries to hunt and 50 cars follow it, then obviously there's like a big parade coming up towards the gazelles. There's no way those gazelles are going to not to be alerted.
Yeah.
So I think it is a major problem at the moment.
We have discussed this in the, on the field, we have had this discussion a lot of times, but what is the solution? I mean, do you see any kind of a solution to this?
Well, I think at the moment it is only basically a major challenge, but I see potential for good to come out of it, because the fact that so many people want to come and see the cheetahs or the elephants or the lions is a very good thing, and it must be I think it should be the engine to expand the amount of land available for the animals and for the tourists to see them. So the idea would be to spread all these cars, instead of having 50 people, 50 cars, or 50 cars over a cheetah. Why don't we try to make more land so that there are more cheetahs, and then there can be 5 cars on every cheetah? And that is basically what's happening with the conservancies in the Mara, in Amboseli, in Sambur as well, like Kipia. Basically, it's just summing it up. The conservancies around the Mara, for example, have amazing wildlife populations now. And there are more and more of these initiatives coming up even farther away from the reserve. More new conservancies coming up. Some are struggling, some are still private initiatives, but all are good, and it's a sign of hopefully of what can happen in the future, an expansion of protected land for wildlife and for tourists, of course. But that one thing that I think is important to mention is, in order for this to happen, people coming to the Mara must be aware and of the number of cars, and I think there should be a demand by tourists for a better wildlife viewing experience.
Right. There's a second interesting question which someone has asked, that now in this kind of a situation where, Mara is always so crowded with photographers, especially during the migration time, how can a photographer take a unique image?
It's difficult. It's difficult. It's very difficult. I think it's okay. The Mara is, there's so many situations, so many animals that with luck, with patience, and you can take a very good image, stunning images, and to make it a unique and something never seen before is a bit harder. Then it takes some of that, what we were saying, that instinct in you, and that.
I think, the natural history part is something we can't control.
Exactly.
A brilliant hunt or something is something which we can't control. I feel a photographer can still take a unique image if he is being very creative, and the creativity part is something which is there in the photographer's control. And
exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
So
exactly. And I think it's still possible, especially maybe not concentrating only on the main, on the main subjects where you have maybe so many cars around. When you have so many cars around, it's very difficult to do something, something different, because you're kind of all forced into one position and you're jostling for space. And
do not run after the 5 cheetahs.
Sorry?
I'm saying do not run after the 5 cheetahs.
Exactly. Exactly.
So, in your book, Light and Dust, I think one of the most the startling work which you have done is coming out with this body of work around caracals. So, just share some experience around, finding out the densite and working with this family of caracals. I mean, I don't think anyone else has that kind of a portfolio of work on caracals. I think you got so bored of shooting caracals that you started experimenting with light with caracals as well.
Of course, yeah, yeah, yeah. No, it's that has been my in the Mara. It has probably been the highlight of all my time in the Mara. Is the thing I remember most fondly. Uh, when I started, that the whole thing started in October of 2009, and by then it was already 2 years that I had moved almost full time in the Mara. And up to then, I've been I've been going to the Mara extensively even before, since 2002 when I moved to Kenya. And sightings of caracals were just not there. No one was saying, yeah, I've seen a caracal. It was just like a totally an invisible animal, something that you wouldn't even dream of trying to see. And so that's the way it was until 2009. And then this one morning I just stumbled on them. That's how it just happened. The first time I think it's written in the book, I saw something jump up on a small termite mound, and I'm like, what is that? It just didn't match any familiar shape. It was like, what animal is that? It's not a jackal. It's not a cheetah. It's not a, what the hell is that? So I stopped, grabbed the binoculars, and that was a caracal, just in the middle of the plains, jumping on a termite mound. It's unbelievable. Obviously, then the caracals disappeared because immediately I saw there was another one behind. So there were two. Then the first one jumped off the termite mound and went into the tall grass, and it was gone. So I was like, yeah, because sometimes you could hear people saying, yeah, I've seen a glimpse of a caracal cross the road, and then it was gone. So that's all you could hear before. And so even me, I thought, wow, that's it. I've seen a glimpse, but then I thought, wow, the animals don't vanish.
Yeah.
Animals do not disappear. Yeah. They must be somewhere. It just got off that termite mound. So I drove a little closer because I was still quite far, and then started looking. I was with some guests. Fortunately, they were very patient guests, and realized the uniqueness of what we were seeing. So we waited about, I think, 10 minutes, and finally I found them. They were tucked in a clump of grass. I just saw the ears scanning with the binoculars continuously. I realized, wow, these animals are just invisible.
Yeah.
Invisible. Just the tips of the ears were popping out of the clump of grass. So then that's how it all started. It was basically just realizing that they are a physical creature like every other. And so that day, I remember it was the last day of the safari for this guest, and we hadn't seen the crossings yet. So that first sighting, we followed those caracals going into a hole, and then we went for the migration to see the crossings, because we hadn't seen them, and it was an intense crossing time. So we went for the crossing. Then after the crossing happened, after lunch, we decided to go back to that area and just give it all to see if we could find them again. And we did find them. They were still there, just around the hole where we left them. So that also kind of, and we stayed the whole afternoon, only one car. And the whole afternoon we were with them, and they were quite confident. Only when there was a time when there was another car coming down the road, came in, and the female disappeared. She went back into the hole and went inside. So the car came and didn't see anything. And as soon as the car moved on, they came back out. So it was really something. I had the feeling that it was really one car only allowed. Like it was, especially that first year. Then the following years, she got slightly better. She got slightly more accustomed to vehicles, because this female, I followed her in that first day was October 2009, and then after that I completely lost sight of her. I remember after that afternoon I said, this is so unbelievable that I've been able to stay so long with these caracals, and I want to try it again. I have to try to see them again. It's going to be hard, but I have to try. So I started patrolling that area continuously, driving, and I didn't see them again for another couple of weeks, until someone. It wasn't my own discovery, because by the time I saw them the second time, they had moved a couple of valleys away. So they had moved quite a significant distance. And somebody told me, "Oh, imagine, I know you're into caracals. This morning I just saw two." There was also a Batia fox den at that time. It was a crazy time in the Mara. It was like 10 pups, unbelievable. So I was also spending some time with the foxes, and at the foxes I met this guy, another guy. He told me, "There are two caracals just up here." I said, "Wow, two caracals!" So I went now with a bit more of a clear indication of where they had been seen. I could start looking again that afternoon, looking until I found them. And then I found them every day for a week. It had been a very dry year, so the grass was short, and it was very sparse, so there could be a lot of sightings, but the rains were starting, so the clouds were everywhere. So to get an image of a caracal, then obviously I started hoping for a backlit caracal, of course. And then it finally happened, I think on the last day. And then the next year, 2011, she had two cubs, which was quite phenomenal. But in the meantime, already in 2010, there had been another female who showed up with cubs just in the same area, which was quite strange. There was very good sighting in 2013 as well, and then she was killed by Bahati, the second female.
Correct.
In 2014.
Right.
So that was kind of with that event. I think it was kind of the end of a bit of reliable sightings. Was all of caracals in the Mara. I know you've done something. I know you've seen a caracal.
I mean, my first sighting was my first sighting was in 2012, and then I had a few regular sightings in 2017.
Okay, the ones near Ashnil in that side. Yeah. And here there's a good site, a good area there now.
Those were a few regular sightings I had. I think in a week's time I had 3 sightings. Not consecutive 3 sightings, but in a gap of 2-3 days.
Right. I never saw those ones.
We like to tell all the viewers that you guys should definitely check out Federico's work on caracals. It's the most powerful documentation of caracals. I think the kind of work which he has done, a photographer can do a work on such a rare cat only when he is so satisfied with the work he has that he could experiment with backlights, doing black and white portraits of caracals, and a hell lot of creative stuff with caracals. So, so talking about your book, Federico, I guess the last time we were talking, you were mentioning about your second book project. What is that about?
Well, it's mostly will be focusing on my black and white, on my latest black and white work.
Oh, okay.
It will be a mostly black and white book, and it's the idea would be to have following a life story through different characters. So it's kind of telling the story of a life, my life, someone else's life, an elephant's life, a lion's life, So through images and through different characters and mostly focusing on the black and white, stuff.
We
So
actually
it's
have a question pertaining to your first book. People are not able to buy the.
yes,
So how to get a copy of the first book? I think
I lost it.
stock.
Yes, yeah, it's very difficult at the moment because it's out of stock. It's sold out. It's I have about 20 copies here at home in Nairobi, and those ones go to the. Normally, I had my copies here to sell through the camps. So if anyone comes to Kenya this year, that's that's a challenge. Or anyway, in the near future, some camps and I can still have a few copies here in Kenya. And unfortunately, shipping out from Kenya is extremely expensive. It's extremely expensive. So it really makes the whole price go up significantly. The Italian edition was available until a month ago. I just checked now on Amazon and I couldn't find it anymore. Even the Italian edition seems to be out of stock.
So, Federico, there's a last question which a lot of people, including me, we would all like to know from you, especially because right now you're there in Nairobi and you are seeing the situation out there in Kenya. That because of the entire COVID-19 crisis, the impact on wildlife tourism in Kenya would have been in a big way. So. How do you think Kenya would be recovering from this? And a lot of people who would have planned their Kenyan safaris in 2020, they are all wary of their travel plans in 2020, especially for the migration. So how do you think, things are going to pan out for 2020? And, what are your thoughts about that?
Well, it's unfortunately, as you can imagine, it's very hard to predict how the situation will be. At the moment, as you know, all flights into Kenya are banned. As I said before, even us, we cannot travel out of Nairobi. So everything at the moment is out of the question. How will the situation be in July, August, September, October is harder to predict. There's so many factors at play. What I can see is on the part of most of the operators on the ground, there's a lot of flexibility in terms of postponement of the trips. So if people have, most people who have booked and will be forced to cancel their trip will have a chance to travel when things open up again. So that's the good thing that the industry has come together to avoid penalizing people and actually making sure that people are committed to come to Kenya as soon as the situation goes back to normal. It's very difficult even for me to predict how will it be. I'm wondering whether, because we don't know if cases will build up here in Kenya. How will the situation be? If international travel will be opened up again? I don't know. I don't think we can be completely isolated for 6 months or something like that. So I suspect that maybe by the summer, some international flights might resume again. If the situation keeps a bit under control like it is now, international flights might resume. So then it becomes an issue of each individual might become each individual country, people coming from different countries. How do they feel about traveling? So it's also very difficult to talk in general terms, because as we said, there are some countries which might be out of the problem, and some which might still be in the thick of it. So it's individual people might have different feelings. I suspect that if things should not be too bad here in Kenya, flights might resume, and hopefully people will try to open up the camps and welcome as many people as possible. But it's very hard to predict. Personally, I haven't cancelled my safaris for the summer yet. In this hoping that the situation improves, but as you get closer, we'll have to see. Maybe a month away from departure, so probably the best thing is to keep a flexible mind, and if see how the situation is a month away from departure. If it's not possible, just be ready to postpone and come later. On one side, I think this, as without going into technical, but I think we'll have to learn how to coexist with this virus. We cannot be in lockdown. The whole world cannot be in lockdown for 12 months until we get a vaccine. So there must be some sort of opening up with a lot of caution, which I think that's so. But on the other, it's very hard to predict. Very hard to predict.
I think,
as we said,
in the worst case scenario, all you Kenyan photographers, you will have to go to Mara and give us a live feed from there.
Exactly. We should do something like that. If we're allowed to leave Nairobi, we will have to do live safaris from through through YouTube or Facebook. Yeah. Let's see. But I hope that at least a little bit of travel can start up, so at least to keep the camps busy and to keep the parks busy, because also tourism has a strong role in maintaining, of course, cash flow for the ranger and conservation organizations, but also just mere presence. When there are people going around in the parks, tourists going around in the parks, every poaching and everything is much harder because poachers cannot hide, and so just having a bit of presence in the park, I think would really be helpful. But health must come, safety must come first. So we'll have to see how the situation is. Let's hope, because it's a major crisis. So many people depend on tourism, so many communities, and so it would be really. Let's hope we can at least see some people coming back.
Yeah.
By the summer, let's see. Very hard to predict.
That's true. So thanks a ton, Federico. Thanks for sparing your time, and good luck with the production of your next book. I'm sure you will have a lot of time processing all the black and white images in the next.
Absolutely. I already did, so I have to find something else now. But there's time to think. Absolutely.
And all you guys will be very able to know that Federico at least has the liberty to go down to Nairobi National Park for safaris right now. So.
Soon I haven't been there yet, but I'll start soon, because I don't know how long can I stay in a home without ever seeing a single animal for too much. So, but thank you for having me, and thank you for inviting me. It's been a great pleasure talking to you and seeing you again.
I hope to see you in the field soon, and
exactly in the
migration.
Exactly. I hope to see you there. Thank you so much.
Thanks.
Thank you. Bye, Shivang. Bye.